Welcome to the Productivity Podcast. This is episode 2 in our series looking at the top right thinking model, and Dulcie joins us again. Hi Dulcie, how are you?
Hi, I'm really good, thank you.
Good, and Sue joins us as well. So many a pod time guest, Susan, welcome back.
Thank you.
And I called you Susan as well, which is hence the laugh. So episode 2, we said we're going to talk at the end of episode 1, Dulcie, about a bit of a case study where we'd worked together. And I know this came from some thoughts that you had. So do you want to talk us through, where the spark came from, how you thought about joining the work we do together with the work that you do, and what we were trying to prove or disprove?
Yeah, sure. So in science, I think that's the best place to start. As always, the best place to start is often in the science. There is more than a strong suggestion, actually. There's really good evidence to suggest that when we go into threat mode, so for most of us, we'll know threat mode as fight or flight, but actually there's 4 different responses we can experience as human beings, which is fight, flight, freeze. So actually we just can't think of anything to say or do, or appease. So say yes and try and get somebody to like you, or try and get somebody to leave you alone. Appease, but we say yes and mean no. What the science suggests is that when we are in that threat space, our brain, in particular, our prefrontal cortex, which is the bit that does all your critical thinking, does your decision making, enables you to join dots and, anything really that you need to think about. What we understand is that when we're in that threat mode, the bit of our brain that does all of that higher level critical thinking is temporarily starved of blood and oxygen in order to go and power our desire to fight, or our desire to run away, or our freeze mode, or our gosh, quick, I best think of something to say to appease. What that means for productivity, and I think this has only ever been theorized about, is that if we are in that threat mode, we won't be as productive, because we will, in effect, not have a fully working brain. We certainly have a fully working conscious brain. And therefore, there should be a correlation in productivity when somebody has been threatened. And when we say threatened, Simon, we don't necessarily mean like physically threatened. I use David Rock's SCARF model a lot to talk about the sorts of threats that we experience, and SCARF's an acronym. So we can experience a threat to our status, our sense of certainty, our autonomy, our relatedness, or our sense of fairness. And these can be real or perceived, but our body operates them in the same way. So what I was really keen to trial but couldn't think of a way to do it was, if somebody is feeling threatened, the science says that their productivity will be reduced because their blood and oxygen that powers the clever bit of their brain will be elsewhere, powering their fight or flight reflex. And also there's a multitask, I think, that goes on, which is like, I'm second guessing somebody's motives, or I'm angry, and you can't do 2 things at once. And that's when 2 things happened. So I'd got a client who we won't mention their name, but I was working with a client on top right thinking, and we'd looked at doing top right thinking with their business, and they did subsequently look at introducing that as a sort of leadership principle. And they wanted a time and motion study doing, which I said, I know some guys who do that kind of old-fashioned stuff. But I said, they talk about it as productivity, and it's much more than that. And I connected the 2 of you together. And it left me wondering, hang on, I wonder if there is a way that we could check fairly scientifically whether somebody's productivity is impacted when they are spoken to in a bottom right way. And if you remember from last time's podcast, bottom right is where there is not much empathy, there's not much trust in a conversation, but there's lots of challenge, and it triggers the threat response. And helpfully, this client is really innovative, really likes to partner with people. And they said, yeah, let's try it. And so the really exciting thing was we'd got a a client who wanted to do like productivity studies, but they understood the principles of top right. And it was simply those things coming together. But I've got to say, I don't think I've ever been more excited about a slightly random idea coming off. But I'll maybe let Sue tell you what happened next, because I think what we found, it's a small study. We've done it twice, but we've got lucky twice, Sue, or we found something really exciting. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think we've found something exciting. So you're right, twice we've done it now. Of kind of when our team was studying, part of what we do as measuring how people are working is looking at the pace that people are working at. And that's not just about speed. Pace is about how effective they are doing their job. So it has elements of quality in there as well. And so what our team have been looking out for when they've been studying is having been explained the top right thinking model to them, so they know when kind of there's been the sort of conversation that might create threat, then we can look to see what happens to the pace that people are working at. And we have seen drops from the ideally that you'd want to see, which is brisk and business-like, is 100. And we've seen drops of down to 80 and 75 when people have had been on the receiving end of conversations that have then been difficult for them and have created a threat. And it's interesting to see what happens. Not only do you get that drop, but then how long it takes people to come back up. And usually it's over an hour. And the thing that seems to bring them back up is when there's customer interactions. And so that interacting with another human and being kind of clicking into your next job, if you like, is the thing that seems to bring them back out of it, while they're carrying on doing their task heads down and no doubt chuntering in their heads about things. Then that pace stays down. But you're right, Dulcie, we've seen it on quite a few occasions now, so it's exciting to see.
And that threat, Sue, just to quantify, I suppose, could be something as simple as, I built the display and I think it's amazing. My line manager's manager comes over and says that's not very good.
Yeah, and it was things like somebody being spoke to quite harshly. So when there's a harsh tell of somebody to do something, so lacking in empathy, so it can be speaking to somebody harshly. We also saw it where somebody got the blame for something that went wrong. Now, whether they were to blame or not, but that fact of being blamed seems to be the thing that caused the dip for them.
And you would see that would trigger somebody's sense of fairness. So that's the F in David Rock's scarf model. If you don't think the criticism is fair, or you were certain that something was good, to take your display point, Simon, I really like some. I think this is good, and somebody says it's not. That they're the sorts of things in a modern day world kick off our fairly Paleolithic threat response. Because remember, that threat response is about the cave person in us, fighting bears and marauding invaders, but the wiring is still there. So I just think it's fascinating to see that we've been able to evidence that there is this really quite significant drop in productivity, and that it lasts for an hour. And for me, the most exciting thing about this is you can change the productivity in your business if you avoid putting people in that threat space, which is entirely possible to do. We probably can't help temporarily triggering that threat response sometimes, because we might say something that somebody thinks is unfair. We didn't mean it to be unfair, but we didn't know about it. If you are practiced at noticing when somebody seems to have taken something the wrong way, and you are trained in how to recover that quickly, what we're saying is that you can change the performance of your business by noticing those quite subtle things. And it's worth money, right? It's profitability that we're talking about being affected here.
And the other great thing we've seen is it can go the other way. So we've seen examples as well of where there have been great conversations with people, and then people's productivity has gone up from the pace measure from 100 to up to 105, 110, where there's been kind of a really good setup to somebody doing things. There was, examples where there was a regional manager had a conversation with somebody and obviously set them up to do the job really well. And so it can not only, you don't just get the negative impact when it's a bad conversation, if you like, but actually a good conversation can push up productivity as well. So it works both ways.
And it's intuitive, right? So I would imagine that most of us think that we would work better for somebody who's encouraging and, cheers us on to do something. And, if we're a bit miffed about something, we might be slower and we might be off in a huff or whatever. But what I love about what you've been able to do, and I've not been able to find any evidence that anybody else has done it in a workplace setting, is to prove it in real life, what we intuitively know to be true, which is how somebody is spoken to, how somebody is led on the shop floor has a direct correlation with workplace productivity.
Yeah, it's amazing to have done it. And I think it's never been more prescient, really, in terms of kind of all the conversations that are sort of around in the press and at the moment about sort of bullying. And it kind of, we've not seen things that you count as far as bullying, but actually it just shows that it can happen, that you get these situations where you get behaviours that are just create the wrong situation to get the best out of the humans that work in it.
Yeah.
It's got me thinking then. So you mentioned, Sue, kind of let's call it the bounce back was kind of an hour because customers were there and, I suppose your mind starts to move on and think about other things. Would be good to try and prove this out as well, maybe in an environment where there's less customer. So if I'm picking in a warehouse, is the impact longer? Because I don't bounce back. So we've not done that, but clearly if anybody's listening and thinks, love to help you prove that, we're all three of us happy to have the conversation. Because that might be a different bounce back.
Yeah. It might be. I think one of the things we know from science, which is quite new. So I've started quoting an article from February 2023 from the University of Kansas. So it's really recent. But they have started to evidence that just one quality conversation with somebody boosts like physical well-being. And they found sort of 7 ways to communicate where we feel more bonded, which is like includes things like showing care, offering sincere compliments, and joking round. So I think what we saw with the customer interaction is it's that human connection. And if just one a day can improve our well-being, so I'm kind of looking with my well-being hat on over there, but if there's a connection between that making people more productive as well, you start to really see something powerful about, again, evidence in why human interaction, quality conversations, caring for each other, doing nice things for people at work is actually likely to increase their well-being, but also increase productivity where maybe there's a productivity lapse or gap because somebody's feeling a bit wounded by something that probably wasn't intended to wound them. So all of these things, again, people say, well-being at work and, it's nice to be nice and all of these things. But fundamentally, I think what we're seeing is they impact bottom line productivity and therefore they impact bottom line profit. And for me, it's that direct correlation that is so exciting.
Yeah, and I think in a world where you'll know as well as us, Dulcie, that everybody's looking for the next cost saving or the next bottom line enhancement or the next service experience that makes them differential, then something really to consider in terms of how that leadership style and behaviour is being delivered, and therefore the consequence and impact we've just talked about.
Well, yeah, and there's no downside, right? It's not like you're putting in a process that takes longer. It's not that people aren't well-intentioned. And, I don't think I've met anybody who is intended to lead badly or intended to wound somebody deliberately with a criticism. Most people just think they're being direct and honest. But if you knew that your way of being direct and honest was affecting productivity hour by hour, or you became aware that there was something about maybe your tone of voice or your body language that was inadvertently meaning that people were less productive, changing that it's not a big deal, right? I've helped people to, overcome these things because self-awareness is, once you know it's there, you can stop doing it quite often. People are intending to do things that reduce productivity. So for me, it's like a really quick, easy win in a business world where usually getting that kind of productivity increase is really hard work, right? You've got to invest money, or you've got to invest in a system, or you've got to invest in something physical to aid a process. Whereas here we're just saying, actually, how you speak to people matters. So let's invest in the people. And the chances are you're going to be doing some sort of leadership development anyway. But this is leadership development that actually has evidenceable bottom line impact. And quite often that's the difficulty with leadership development. It's hard to prove the ROI. Whereas I think what we're saying is we can prove the ROI. And that's going to be really interesting, I think, for, hopefully a couple of clients to pick up is how far can we take this?
Absolutely. And so in terms of, do you maybe just want to explain the kind of the process? So Dulcie, we had the conversation with Dulcie, and then it kind of came to you and your team, what you did.
Yeah. So what I did is I'd got the top right model that I'd been using with people anyway. And I got Dr. Ian Price, who I know you're going to speak to in this series, to help me critique it, to make it ready for you guys to use for your observations. And then it was about that, as you were observing people, going about their daily business and how long it took them to, I don't know, make a drink or, serve a customer, you were also observing how they did it, so that how they speak to their teams, how they, behave around a store. And it's that I think nobody's done before. It's that integrating what we know about the science of leadership and neurolinguistics and all of that, but integrating it with people doing their day job on a shop floor. And I think the fact that we've now replicated it with the team at ReThink means that it's real, right? You don't get lucky twice.
No. And from a practical perspective, we can integrate it into the different types of studies that we do. So whether it's an efficiency study where it's a team-wide study that's looking at performance over time, that's where we've seen quite a bit of the pace changes that are happening. We've also done it as part of role study where we're shadowing individual roles to see what impact their conversations are having on the people around them as well. So we've developed a way of doing it that means we can integrate it into a lot of our different study types. And it's something that, with Dulcie's help, we've been able to make it so it's nice and straightforward for our team to be able to do it. That makes it really easy to integrate it into the practicalities of capturing data.
Yeah, I mean, they're there anyway, so aren't they? So it's not as if you're adding in another process. You've just got your teams doing two things at the same time. And I know, speaking to some of them, they're like, actually, it's really interesting for them to do because they're integrating something that they, do all the time with a new angle to, a new lens to view it through. So I know, speaking to them, they're really excited about it as well.
Yeah.
So in summary then, lots of benefits, as we said. I think you captured it really well, Dulcie, in terms of, who wouldn't want to increase their bottom line profitability. Easy for the ReThink team to do in terms of it blends nicely into our study methodologies. And then Dulcie, clearly you can then take the results and work with those leadership teams to drive that performance and therefore, underlying productivity even further.
Yeah, and that's what I want to do more on now that we've kind of proved it, if you like. So that, initially it was about, I wonder if we could actually prove just how much money is being lost by people not being spoken to very well at work. But now we've proved that, what I'd love to do is to work with a company who then want to use me to develop their leaders to very specifically make it safe for, these top right conversations to happen. So actually then evidence that across a business, if you show people how to increase trust, because there are things that we do as human beings that do increase trust, so it's entirely trainable. If you show people how to do that, and then you show them how to challenge without triggering a threat response. What I'm now super excited about is if we trained that in, what would the productivity look like before and what would the productivity look like after? Because if we are onto something here, which I think we all are, and we repeated the before and after, we've got a really clear ROI for leadership development. Because as Sue said, it's not just about the kind of disbenefits of putting somebody into threat mode. It's about what happens when you speak to somebody well, what happens when you're encouraging. And therefore, there should be a really big business benefit in doing this with somebody. And for me, it's that scale that I'd love to tackle next if we could find a partner to do that with.
Yeah, excellent. I think that'll be the interesting bit, to look at the before and after. So we did a bit of the analysis work before where we've looked at the kind of before scenario, and already there are some interesting variances in terms of different job roles and different sort of levels of capability. But I think to have a before and after for training would be brilliant to do.
Mm-hmm.
So there's the challenge then. If you're listening and this excites you, we think clearly there's a massive opportunity for organisations. Then get in touch with us. You know where to find us. Dulcie, where's the best place for people to find you?
Toprighthinking.com. Or also if they buy It's Not Bloody Rocket Science, which you can easily find on Amazon. The contact details are all in there as well.
Brilliant. And we'll put your LinkedIn profile as well on the show notes so people can click through and connect. Brilliant. Well, Sue, Dulcie, really appreciate your time on this episode, and we'll head into episode 3 where Dr. Ian joins us. Thanks both.
All right. Cheers. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.